So I like to remind myself with that saying, Dharma over material benefit or good. Oh, good over fame. Beings over personal happiness in secret. I am so delighted to get a chance to talk a little bit about Bodhicitta. He had Bodhicitta too. Usually I carry around with me. I didn't bring my Shantideva book. I thought you carried enough already. Oh, and I knew you'd have one. But I have three copies of this. A couple are published during different days. But, they're all highlighted in different color ink. And, it's a kind of book I think if you carry with you can pick up any place. And it's just a marvelous book. And I'm so glad that there are all these translations, but I'm particularly glad that there's this one. The Padmakara groups, The Way of the Bodhisattva. Is it all right? Can I start speaking now? I don't know what I'm thinking. What am I doing? So I carry around these two books usually. One is The Way of the Bodhisattva, and the other is a collection of sermons by Martin Luther King called The Strength to Love. Similar. Oh, often the Bodhisattva is called a brave Bodhisattva. And it takes courage to love as well. So I do have the collection of sermons. It's a slim volume. And I thought, that's enough. They'll have The Way of the Bodhisattva, not to worry about. Many of the sayings that we remember, I mentioned this once, by His Holiness, it's okay, by His Holiness, are directly from, they're verses, from Shantideva's text. For example, when he says at 10, chapter 10, the dedication page, now then, as long as space endures, and as long as there are beings, may I too remain. It's a nice one, though. 10:55, chapter 10, verse 55. And there are many, and I hope to name some, point some out. One of your favorite texts, too. Lovely. So without bodhicitta, it still can be Buddhism, yeah. Without bodhicitta, it's not Mayana. How can I say that? Like that. Without bodhicitta. Without that as the basis. When the supreme thought of bodhicitta, of compassion, arises for the welfare of all beings, that is your first step on the Mayana path. Guaranteed. That's your first step. Yesterday I asked you to think of some examples, so that you know that you've all touched it already. Whatever situation where, without a moment's hesitation, you stepped in, but it wasn't you doing it. It was like you put yourself aside to help another. Pull them out, in front of the, from being in front of a car or being in front of a train or something, just in that instant. You didn't think, you just helped them. That's the rare thought of bodhicitta. That's its arising. Shantideva says, when it's arisen, when it's arisen, then you can practice to lengthen it. You can extend it. And practice helps you to do that. But I get ahead of myself. Usually, once or twice a year, I lead a weekend retreat on the Bodhicharya. avatar. During that retreat, the members read aloud the verses. We always manage somehow. Sometimes we have to skip a little bit of the wisdom chapter. Too much to explain, too difficult, too complex, but all the other chapters. And the end of the dedication, we manage to read aloud. And the group realizes or understands that they're not only reading it for the benefit of beings, but they're listening to it for the benefit of beings. And they're really focused on it, because my suggestion is that people read a few verses until they feel like letting go, and the next person just takes it up. And for 3 days, we just sit and read this text. And then people keep a journal. People write down verses that are particularly important to them. And we have times when we talk about those verses. It's really a nice experience. Yeah. It's always lovely. Okay. So some little bit about Shantideva, who also has a great life story. Shantideva, Lord of Peace, Shivala. Tibetan. You have an image of Shantideva somewhere. I passed. And it's different than the ones that I'm familiar with, that show Shantideva levitating just above his pillow, Shantideva levitating. That comes up in his life story. The author of this text, and I mentioned before that Geshe Sonam Rinchen, okay? Who sneezed? You all right? Yeah. That he often mentions Shantideva when he's talking about Bodhicitta. So Shantideva is an 8th century Mahayana poet and philosopher. And he wrote this great poem that within 100 years of its being written, there were at least 110 commentaries on it. And there were different commentaries on different chapters, as we have today. With His Holiness doing the chapter you've done on healing anger, or what's it called? Working with anger. Yes, healing anger, His Holiness's piece on chapter 6. And there are individual texts on the wisdom chapter by His Holiness and others. But such was the power of this particular composition that it became so popular throughout the inner Asian world right away. It's a lovely poem. So, a little bit about Shantideva's life, because even though he's the author of this text, he's the author of Shiksha Samuchaya. Excuse me. He's known. He's known by the term Busuku. You know this story. Shantidevas, they're the regular motifs for most Namtar, and the father was a king, and mom was, beautiful and intelligent, but when it was time for him to take the throne, Manjushri intervened and told him, that seat's mine. And Shantideva left. Now, there are tantric versions of the life, and there are the more standard versions of his life. And some arrange it differently. I'm just going to tell one part. Sometimes there are 2 parts of the story, and different translations put the tantric side first and then the ordinary part. I'm just going to tell the ordinary part, because it seems clearly put together. It's a syncretic text. But just his life. He goes to Nalanda. He finds himself at Nalanda University, the great Buddhist institute of learning, Vikramashila, Nalanda, Odantapuri. Nalanda was the most exquisite place. His Holiness always reminds us when he gives a teaching that this teaching is in the tradition of Nagarjuna, in the tradition of Nalanda. Famous institution. But there, Shantideva becomes known as Busaku, a lazy, good-for-nothing monk who eats 5 times what any other monk there eats, who walks around, shirks all his duties, and because he eats so much, he, how do I say it? Makes caca so much. That's what my issue is. So Boo is because he eats all the time. Sue is because he appears to be sleeping all the other time. And Ku is because he's always getting rid of all that food he eats. But they don't see him doing anything else. So they don't call him lazy good for nothing. They call him the one who just eats, sleeps. That's what they call him. So I was telling that story, and then there were questions after, and one woman said, they ought to have kicked him out. I mean, aren't there rules or something? He clearly wasn't living up to the bargain of being a monk there. They should have just kicked him out. Well, the monks didn't like it because, you see, they were on a rotation basis, and people had duties, and he always found a way to get out of his. And you know what I mean? Right? This week you're on this duty, right? But he always found a way to get out of it. The other monks didn't like it. Why should he get such favors? Like, what's so special about him? All we see him do is eating, So they were quite frustrated. And people wondered whether his teacher was somehow protecting him and all this stuff. And one story says the monks conspired. They got the teacher on their side, so the teacher said, okay, he'll have to give his talk. They were planning that each one of the monks had to deliver a lecture. And he'd gotten out of that, So they said, don't let him out this time. Make him give a talk. But they really, really disliked him, He was really... And the woman who said kick him out, the next morning she came back. It was so incredible. Lama Zopa apparently really thinks a lot of this woman. I found out after. She came back and she said, you know what? They just couldn't see him. They couldn't see his good qualities. Mm. She had dreamt it that night. Mm. She said they just couldn't see. I think you're right. But he's called Busaku. And then so the teacher says, okay, you're going to have to give the lecture. No way out of it this time. And the other monks say, okay, normally you come in and you sit on the throne or you sit on the table, the chair right here. They're going to make it super hard for him to do that, even super hard for him to mount the throne. They make this plan. He'll never be able to get up there. They invite the king of the land to participate in this grand humiliation. Okay. When the teacher says to Shantideva, there's no way around it this time. One of the details of the story, not often put in there, is that Shantideva then gets a little nervous. Really? Am I going to have to? He says, but I haven't broken any rules, so I eat a little much. 5 times what anybody else ate. Okay. The master says, well, his guru says, what can I do to help you? And he says, well, I'm going to need some help. You got anything like Manjushri way or something? Help me out. Give me a T so I can remember something. The teacher, in one story, the teacher gives him a meditation and at least a dharani to say, and Shantideva puts on that evening Gomtak meditation strap. Last time I was in Nepal, they were selling those to tourists. What are tourists going to do with a gomtak? The strap Milarepa has, so you can put your knee under it so you don't fall over and you stay awake and meditate. So they are selling to tourists. So Shantideva put that on that night. And then the story says, then he woke up. He still managed to go to sleep. He woke up and there was Manjushri, shimmering silver, sparkling all over the place. And he woke up startled, and Manjushri said, yes, like, what can I do for you? And he said, tomorrow I have to give this big talk. Manjushri says, okay, no problem. You'll be all right. So the next morning, when all the monks are waiting for Shantideva not to make it up to this grand throne they've constructed, they look, they don't see him. They look, they don't see him. Well, is he not going to show up? And boom, he appears there. They don't know how he got up there. But there he is. And what he asks them is, would you like to hear, right, something old or something new? So they say, well, we don't want to hear anything old. You tell us something new. All smirking, There's nothing he knows. How could he know anything? And Shantideva says, oh, something new? Okay. And he begins reciting this text. New in all the world. Because he wrote it. And he recites it. People start, I can see them, modern day folk, grabbing pens, papers, pads. It's marvelous, blows everybody's mind. And he recites all of this text till he gets to chapter 9. And at that point, his body starts rising from the seat. And they can still hear his voice, but he goes out of their sight. And so usually you see an iconography for Shantideva, and you see a meditation cushion or two underneath, and he's just floating in the air. That's ninth chapter recitation, So what was Shantideva doing all that time? Well, one of the things he was doing was writing this text and Shiksha Samuchaya, and it's a wonder. It's a marvelous text. Busuku. So you never can tell. Might look like just wasting time, but you never can tell. Enlightened Buddhas, writing that stuff. Ooh. Don't be too quick to judge. So I wrote this text, and some say it's 1,000 verses. Oh, academics do things like, we have all this free time, so we actually count the number of verses. Different editions, and not really 1,000, but 918 in this version. 918 shloka. Beautiful, I think, verses. Whole Buddhist path laid out there. But now Shantideva also is someone who uses carrot and uses stick. And he, from one verse, in the same chapter, he's threatening you like crazy. You're going to boil, you're going to burn forever and forever. But you could be, and then it could be nice. And apparently, since he's writing for 8th century monks, just his community, some of it raises hackles, like. At any rate, we maybe get to some of that, but. So it's a beautiful text, I think. And it's also, it becomes the foundation of rituals we observe today, like Bodhisattva vows. Oh, so aspiring Bodhisattva vows, and actual, aspiring to Bodhicitta and then actually practicing Bodhicitta. Oh, sections of the ritual use part of this text. Huh? I'm sure you've heard. So if one looks at, it's just an example, chapter 3 here, and then I want to go back and say something about the structure of the text. But if you look at chapter 3 here, chapter 3, verse 18 and following, this comes up when you take Bodhicitta out. It's a chapter called Taking Hold of Bodhicitta. Chapter 3, verse 18. May I be a guard for those who are protectorless, a guide for those who journey on the road. For those who wish to cross the river, may I be a boat, a raft, a bridge. May I be an isle for those who yearn for land, a lamp for those who long for light, for all who need a resting place, a bed. For those who need a servant, may I be their slave. May I be the wishing jewel, the vase of wealth, a word of power and the supreme healing. May I be the tree of miracles for every being, the abundant cow. Just like the earth and space itself and all the other mighty elements, for boundless multitudes of beings, may I always be the ground of life, the source of varied sustenance. Thus, for everything that lives, as far as there are the limits of the sky, may I be constantly their source of livelihood until they pass beyond sorrow. One of the vows, when you're ritually in Zen, you hear these verses, the four immeasurables in these verses. And then in the actual ceremony, I don't know how exactly it's done here, but in some places one is told, wants to take Bodhisattva vows. Then just before verse 23, add, all you Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, please listen. Then, all you Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, please listen. Just as all the Buddhas of the past have brought forth the awakened mind, and in the precepts of the Bodhisattvas, step by step abode and train, likewise for the benefit of beings, I will bring to birth the awakened mind, and in those precepts, step by step, I will abide. You take those, you say that 3 times, and then as the sort of stamp, after flowers are passed around, after there's much joy, everyone reads together, verse 26 and following. Today my life has given fruit. This human state has now been well assumed. Today I take my birth in Buddha's line and have become the Buddha's child and heir. And goes on. It's a very joyous kind of thing. But this is the source of it. These verses are instrumental in that ceremony. Oh, I think the other thing to mention is that he says a lot. He says I a lot. He calls himself a fool. He says, you're in hell, blah, 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 and he's going, oh, no. And he says, get yourself together. But he's talking to himself. He says at the beginning, in order to train my mind, I said these verses out. Have to keep that in mind. I like this verse in particular, from chapter 8, verse 1 to 9. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others, while all the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for myself alone. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others, while all the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for myself alone. A number of times the theme is repeated. I get off on the verses, I'm just going to go back and talk about the text. But anyway, a number of times it's repeated. This is medicine you have to take. For what invalid was ever cured by simply reading in the doctor's treatises? Such a nice line, I think. It comes up 4 or 5 times. But this you have to do yourself. For what invalid was ever cured by simply reading the prescription? You know, so true. So true. So we mentioned before this verse. I tried to track it down with Kungzang Peldon's commentary, but he just refers back to His Holiness using it in the Refined Gold. Nobody talks about where it's from. But it appears that Nagarjuna's statement, found here, tells how we should approach and read this text. Nagarjuna said somewhere, probably letter to the king or, you know, one of the short ones. He says, may Bodhicitta, may Bodhicitta. What is Bodhicitta? Excuse me. May Bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. You recite that, right? What apparently happened without much clarification is that later commentaries on this text took that verse by Nagarjuna as being a good hermeneutical hook. You know, it's being a good way to interpret, to read this text. Because Nagarjuna's statement says, where it has not come to be, Bodhicitta, may it arise. And where it has arisen, may it be maintained. And where it is maintained, may it increase evermore. The commentator said, that's a good way to read this text. The text has 10 chapters. 3 deal with the first part. Second 3 deal with the second part of the Nagarjuna piece. And the third deals with increasing it more and more. Also, one of the clear things about reading this text is 9 chapters plus dedication, right? And the most important, though it's hard to say, the most important chapter is the 3rd one, the 6th one, and the 9th one. That works for reading this text because chapters 1 and 2, the excellence of bodhicitta and confession, but 3 is taking hold of bodhicitta. And that's where those verses from the ritual come from, that 3rd chapter, taking hold of bodhicitta. Then, 4th chapter on being carefulness in this translation. 5, vigilant introspection. And 6, patience, the patience chapter is really meaty. It's of great importance. And then there's chapter 7 on diligence. And there's chapter 8, meditative concentration. Very good. I've been looking to that for years. And 9 is the wisdom chapter. 9 is the wisdom chapter. So, chapters 3, chapter 6, and chapter 9, they're key in this text. But all the verses are quite beautiful, I think. So what is bodhicitta? It is a rare thought that we have touched. Is it a feeling you have? Bodhicitta. Is it something you know after the fact? Is it anything you know? Not a good question, I guess. Think about it. Bodhicitta. Bodhicitta. How do we usually translate that term? How is it usually translated? Bodhicitta. Awakening mind. Altruistic intention. Mind of enlightenment. What do we say ordinarily? Okay, I was just thinking compassion. We say it's compassion. Maybe you don't. Maybe you say karuna and all that maitri, but I don't know. Nobody says compassion is bodhicitta? Not here. What? What is? Compassion is the seed for. Oh, tiga. This is different. Ah. Yeah? It's the seed for. Compassion is the seed for bodhicitta. Oh, tiga. Ah, this is interesting. Because, all right, because I wanted to interrogate with you compassion. Maybe you don't need to do that. Hmm. Hmm. Okay, there's Maitri and Karuna. All right, then I'll just tell you that I find myself trying to explain to my students that Maitri and Karuna mean two different things. They can't quite get it. The wish that others be happy and the wish that others not suffer. Then I'm trying to get at, since this book by Santideva is famous for teaching compassion, you're saying it's a mistake? Ah. And okay. Bodhicitta means heart of as well as mind of. Uh-huh. Okay. Uh-huh. It's interesting. Okay. So there's a wish. Let me just come at it my way, okay? There's the wish that others be happy, and there's the wish that others not suffer. Uh, and it seems to me that my students always get compassion in the wish that others not suffer confused with the wish that all beings be happy. And I try to say that it seems to me a useful distinction, these two wishes, right? Oh, but mhm. I don't think they see the difference, and I'm not sure I know the way you're being taught. You're teaching it either. I mean, I'm sure it's relevant and it's the way teachers teach it, but it's not the way I understand it. But maybe we can talk about them here with the group. Get clear about it. That would be good. Huh? Okay. So let's see if it comes up. Certainly, this is the topic of discussion. Whether the seed of the excellence of bodhicitta, confessions taking hold of bodhicitta. Let's see. Which shall I look into? If these are the titles, the excellence of bodhicitta, confession, and taking hold of bodhicitta, which shall I look into and read to you? Read some sections of. What do you think? Taking hold? Take a ha. Taking hold of bodhicitta. And so, rejoice, rejoice, rejoice. And so I join my hands and pray. The Buddhas who reside in every quarter kindle now the Dharma's light for those who grope bewildered in the dark of pain. I join my hands beseeching the enlightened ones who wish to pass into nirvana do not. So we're going through the 7 points in the please stay, remain, sit, teach, and ba ba ba. For all those ailing in the world, until their every sickness has been healed, may I myself become for them the doctor, nurse, the medicine itself. Raining down a flood of food and drink, may I dispel the ills of thirst and famine, and in the aeons marked by scarcity and want, may I myself appear as drink and sustenance. Not too many more. For sentient beings poor and destitute, may I become a treasure ever plentiful, and lie before them closely in their reach, a varied source of all that they might need. My body thus, and all my goods besides, and all my merits gained and to be gained, I give them all and do not count the cost to bring about the benefit of beings. Mm-hmm. Oh, and did you get those verses used in the text? Mm-hmm. And so today, within the sight of all the protectors, I summon beings, calling them to Buddhahood, until that state is reached to every earthly joy. May gods and demigods rejoice. Oh, Lama Yeshe said, Bodhicitta is the most important and the easiest, the most pleasurable practice we have. You think? You do. It's pleasurable. Why is that?
Maybe after renunciation, bodhicitta is an upper.
Enough with that nasty pill. Give me the upper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm ready for the upper now.
I also have a question. In the Lamrim Chenmo, at least the version that I've been reading, they don't use the term bodhicitta. It's spirit of enlightenment. I just wonder why they didn't use that in those texts.
You mean why they use
Spirit of enlightenment.
Yeah, that's their translation.
Okay, it's just the way they translated it, because I was just surprised. I never see bodhicitta in that translation.
Yeah, no, they translated the term bodhi meaning enlightenment, citta meaning
Okay, all right.
And that, for me, is relative bodhicitta is compassion, and ultimate bodhicitta is wisdom. No? The second one's right. Oh, good!
Specifically the wisdom realizing emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
Non-concept, directly. But the first one isn't compassion.
Mm-hmm.
We should give her a definition.
Yes, please do.
It's not our definition.
Well, the definition that we use, that's in our text, because we use the Lamrim text, the bodhicitta is a primary mind with two aspirations.
Mm-hmm.
One is to relieve the suffering of beings, and the other is to become enlightened in order to do that. So then if you just say compassion, you don't have that part of becoming enlightened in order to do it. That's why we make this big discernment.
Mm-hmm.
Because the compassion is there, and so all the parts that you read about the suffering and everything, it's right there, because that's the motivation. But that's one aspiration, but you have a second aspiration, because you realize that, hey, unless I have some skills, I'm not going to be able to really help people. So that's why you need the second aspiration.
Oh,
That's how
I hear it at least. Thank you so much. But for me, that's added.
Yeah.
That you have to, because I'm just thinking enlightenment. Oh, compassion and wisdom, relative bodhicitta, absolute bodhicitta. But you add that there's a recognition of that, but then you have to have the aspiration for it. Ah, okay. Huh, okay. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, well, let me just tell you this source. Mm-hmm. And Lama Zopa and Hardayal saying enlightenment takes these two. And I really want to talk about what compassion is, because I think so many people get that wrong. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So, the English word is to suffer with, right? Means to suffer with. And how often do we do that? I mean, do we take it that way? Do we try to apply it that way? Why is it pleasurable? If so, it's pleasurable? Oh, I can see that the method might be pleasurable, but is the act, do you actually do it? Do you suffer with? See what I'm saying? There's a difference between, one can pay lip service to the idea, I wish that others not suffer. That's different than really feeling with suffering beings. And renunciation comes out of that. And, like you really, if you have no, I think my understanding is, if you have no sense of how how you suffer first, being in samsara, that's sort of like a prerequisite so that you understand that all other beings suffer that way too. And therefore, you aspire not only to get out of samsara, but to help all others get out, to gain liberation from it, right? So how is that pleasurable? Okay. Though Shantideva says the Bodhisattva swoops down like a swan landing on a lake. Sounds pretty pleasurable, but that's the brave Bodhisattva.
So when I said it was pleasurable, what I was referring to was when I can get out of my own way and I'm helping someone else and focused on them, that's quite pleasurable.
Mm.
There's no affliction stuff in that, generally. So that's what I was referring to when I said pleasurable.
Thank you, Timmy. Yes.
To quote something you said yesterday, it's like the suffering of grasping at the self is quenched by the rain and coolness of bodhicitta.
It's too sweet. I'm not crying anymore. Oh. You work at a work kitchen, at a food kitchen all day. You're very tired at the end of the day, but people say it's a good tired, right? It was a joy. Pleasurable in that sense, absolutely. Doing good for someone else, taking yourself out of the way. I think that is, that can be pleasurable. I think, yeah. I think it's a joy that the method for gaining wisdom is compassion. That the method for gaining wisdom, in one sense, is definitely giving over self to others is a method. Giving over self to others is good. That's making it towards wisdom, right? You're getting rid of self. This is how I heard it explained. I don't know if I'm being clear or not. That the method, putting into practice compassion, putting into practice actually helps. It's a methodology for gaining wisdom. She said practicing compassion alone won't give you wisdom.
Yeah.
I agree
So
with that too.
it's a motivation for wisdom. But it depends what you mean by method for wisdom. It wouldn't be a method for gaining wisdom.
It's to the extent that you focus less on self. It's sort of like, it's almost like a bulldozer. It's a concrete way of saying to someone, to the extent that you lessen attachment to self by giving it over to some. That's like a practical method.
Yeah, except the Shravakas gain wisdom, but they don't do it by that method. They don't practice compassion as a way to gain wisdom. Wisdom has to be cultivated separately from compassion.
I'm not talking about cultivating, I'm not talking about meditating, I'm talking about sort of in practice, practical way. Yeah. Of just not thinking about self. You really can think about others, not thinking about it, just doing it. Just doing it is a way of describing, should I put it that way? Would it be better? Is a way of describing gaining, putting self out of the way and therefore touching wisdom a little. But, I don't want to be too contrived. I'm just saying that I was taught that that was a good method, and maybe method is too concrete or too contrived, but it was a good method. So go work for others. You'll learn stuff. Not saying you'll learn wisdom, but you'll definitely. Tikaha. Venerable?
Like in the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, self-cherishing and self-grasping are sort of mixed. They're talked about as if, actually it's described that self-cherishing is the root of cyclic existence. And so I wonder if that was the angle that this description comes from. By overcoming self-cherishing, then one is overcoming the root of cyclic existence. But because they come together. Self-cherishing, well, when you're focused on others, you're overcoming self-cherishing, really, not, or the self-centered attitude, not so much directly countering self-grasping ignorance. But the two come together often in our mind and create all our problems.
Yes. The two are good friends.
So one of the ways that I heard what you were saying was that the experience of helping others, because you've forgotten about yourself, helps you gain more experience in the feeling of what that feels like, so that it might be an aid to helping you attain wisdom, because you can have that feeling of not such a strong self. So does that kind of make sense?
Yes, well, I'm saying, I think I'm trying to say something simpler for you advanced students. I think that's what it is. I'm saying what lots of books out there, what is compassion is wisdom in action. That's all I'm saying. And I think it's a mistake to say, wisdom is over here and compassion is over here. They're the same, wisdom acting is compassion. That is one way of saying it. Wisdom acting is compassion. Otherwise, it turns into something else that's not compassion. It turns into pity, for example. It turns into different things. If it's not selfless, it turns into self-clinging kinds of activity.
I'm just wondering, well then, now you can't have wisdom without compassion, right? So it's an ingredient, an essential ingredient for wisdom, right?
They do use compassion as the proof that the Buddha meditated to attain the wisdom. So as the motivation, as the compelling force that then led him to the supreme eliminations and so forth and
We
so
have
forth.
a debate going.
Yeah. So in that context,
Answer
you can see
quickly.
how this is coming from.
I'm saying something much more simple, I think, but anyway.
I'm thinking perhaps a compassionate motivation might help one to reduce one's self-centered attitude, but not necessarily affect one's self-grasping ignorance.
Sometimes this happens in academia too. I think about every 10 years there's a new language that comes out. And if you don't, now it's intersectionality, that's the word that's everywhere. If you don't use that 3 times in a sentence, you're not with it. Intersectionality. A black woman feminist wants to say, you're talking about feminism, but there's an intersection where black and culture, and so it's just another way of saying these things intersect. That's okay. But if you don't use that term 3 times in a sentence, then you're not up to date. I think this debate is not at all what I was trying to get at. And I know it's, my fault. I should have, but I'm trying to say something much simpler, which is that this book is about the benefits of compassion, and there is a wisdom chapter too, but it's basically about compassion, not about the motivations for compassion. This is about compassion. This book is about bodhicitta, the way I use it. the way I understand it. And compassion, I thought, would be a good discussion piece because not everybody agrees what that is. Right? And too often, people who talk about it don't know that they're judging so much because that self is still there. And true compassion is feeling with and not being distant, not being separate, but not being bowled under. A bodhisattva is a brave bodhisattva because she or he willingly goes into suffering, suffers with, which is the true sense of that English word, compassion, to suffer with, and doesn't, and yet can still move in the world to liberate and liberate beings. Now, too often I see people donating to causes, getting stuck on, getting stuck on what they're doing, either thinking they're compassionate, but it seems to me being very, I don't know, what do I want to say, selfish about it. They're self-cleaning. Doesn't seem to be compassion at all. Oh, lots of people who say, oh, the poor things, and think that's compassion. That is so, oh, the poor things. I mean, people mean well, but I don't think that's what compassion means. Okay. Now, this other side of wisdom, too loose. Trungpa thing. Oh, Tigah. I think this is one of the best books I've read on commentary on your library. You know Gala Rampas, Rob Jampa, Nimapa Lama, but uses Kadam sources and to dispel the misery of the world is a commentary on Bodhicharya Avatar. One of Sojai Rinpoche's teachers. It's such it's called To Dispel the Misery of the World. It's one of the best commentaries on this I've ever seen. It's so detailed. It's noted for being the place where Tong Lin is explained so well. But every sentence of this book I enjoy. It makes me smile. So to read the two of them together, it'll really be a treat. Now, Shantideva is a treat in himself. This book is a treat in itself, I think. Because to see the way he handles the carrot and the stick, to see the way he phrases our downfalls in terms of our cravings, how much the self gets involved in everything we do. And yet his work, even he uses a stick and then he encourages in ways that are, that he finds the words to say that encourage us. So then he's using the carrot, of course, but brilliantly worded, I think. Just lovely. So this text is extolling bodhicitta. So what is he talking about? Is he just talking about the seed? Well, anyway, I don't know. But he's talking about bodhicitta, whatever that is. It's a miraculous thing. It's a selfless thought for others, right? Which is rare. And then he suggests that there are ways for maintaining that thought, and there are ways for growing that thought. So it's a practical guide too. The reason I've been studying this for 2 decades is the meditation chapter talks about equalizing self with others and exchanging self with others. And he really means that in a way. He has you he has you actually meditate upon that. Sit yourself in the middle. You're sitting in the middle as an observer. And then sit yourself over here. And then see another over here. And perform actions. And see what you think, what you judge. And see what... And I think it's brilliant as a way of actually helping us go there, to that place. Do we ever see ourselves as equals with others? You know, it's hard. We want to put I first. I'm most important. It's me, me, me. I don't know why that's even a question. But he shows that there are methods that it's possible to learn. You know, you can unlearn all the me, 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 me. He shows you a few methods. His Holiness in 2005, I think, in Phoenix, Arizona, talked about chapter 8, the meditation chapter. It was quite good, I think. And so my question was back to, so what do you think compassion is? Sorry, it's the topic of the session. What's compassion?
Give the way we define it, because we have a way we define it, but I want to say more what I think I hear you saying is like more by example. So when you have people in your life that are troubled, you want to help them often. And unless you have some wherewithal about how you're going to go about it, that's where I think what you were trying to point to in my mind is like you have to wisely help them. So try to relieve people of their suffering without any clue about how you're going to go about it can just lead to more misery.
Disastrous.
Kind of like what, you know, like what they have to teach you not to be an enabler. Or things like, all those things like that where we fall into things. And we might think we're being compassionate, but we don't, you know, because we don't want the person to suffer, but we're too clueless about the mechanisms or all the various things that are coming together here that are in front of us to know what to do. So for me, compassion, I guess I break it up the way compassion is this wish to relieve the suffering, but you need some other ingredients. That's the way I think of it in my mind. So you can easily fall off into things that aren't compassion anymore, like getting upset yourself, or pity, or anything, or indifference, or all these. Your mind can grow away from that. So I guess I think that I always think of this more like what underlies all the 6 perfections is compassion. That's like the base, and all these other things kind of need that. But you need all of them mixed together to make the whole thing work. That's how I always think of it. I mean, just more experientially.
I guess that's a category I put Jan in, that experiential. The department had to put me in that. Oh, whatever that meant. But yeah. But I'm not sure that the wisdom is just being wise about it. I think wisdom is a little more selfless. You'll know what to do, but you know what to do after a lot of training.
And I try to not think of compassion towards people who are, I can see that they're suffering. Because a lot of people, you don't know what they need compassion for. So I sort of look at it as trying to look at people more equally. So that in the way that you treat them is just compassionate for them being another human being, no matter what they carry or don't carry. I'm getting a little lost in that thought, but...
Don't have to like them, but you do have to love them.
Yeah, right.
By virtue of their being a human being. Pliny, 5th century Greek, said, be kind. His Holiness says, my religion is kindness. 5th century Greek said, be kind. Why should you be kind? Because everyone you meet is carrying a burden. Everyone you meet suffers. Everyone. Well, I don't know, got 50 million and a lot of cars and all that. Then suffers he might lose it, right? Suffers the accountant might be stealing. People have different sufferings. All the Buddha said there's suffering. There's love them because they're another suffering being, just like you. Just like you is important.
For me, what I come back to, and this is just my thinking about this, is I used to have a daycare center, and I realized I didn't have any negative feelings towards the children. It was like whatever they did, it was, oh yeah, kids do that.
Wow.
And so, it's not that I just, free let them do whatever they wanted to each other, however they wanted to do it. It wasn't that way, but there was nothing in me that was punitive about how I went about what I do with them. And I always wish that I felt that way about grown-ups. But the thing that really kind of made the bridge for me about compassion versus sympathy or any of those other things is that when they were suffering, I saw their suffering and I said, oh, they're really suffering. And I saw the end of their suffering.
Before it got there?
Yeah, because, they'll fall down, they'll cry like it's the end of the world.
But you knew it would be better.
That they would stop crying and that there would be the end of that suffering. And for me, somehow that understanding of the end of suffering, it mitigates for me my suffering. When I see someone else suffer, a lot of times there's like this urgency, like make it stop so I can stop suffering. Like make that one stop suffering so I can. So I have a tendency to go to shortcut strategies that are not truly helpful because I have this panic, like I have to make this suffering stop so that I don't feel bad. And then I have to like pull it back and say, okay, what is really going on here? What needs to happen? Sort of like on to what you were saying. What really needs to happen? Not to panic, make this stop because of my pain. To remember that, when I'm not in that crazy mind, but when I'm in the mind where I see the suffering, they're really suffering, and it will end. Okay, what can I contribute to that person outside of whether or not I'm in pain or not at the same time with them?
This wise, because you can see its end, is different, Venerable Tarpa, than, I know not to enable, not that technical kind of know-how to deal with that situation. That wise is a bigger wise, right? Oh.
What Tanya just said kind of picked a question that I was thinking before of, do bodhisattvas really suffer when they see the suffering of others? Like with the definition of compassion, like to suffer with. If you can see the end of the suffering, do they really truly suffer with? Is there there's an understanding and there's the urgency to want to help, but do they suffer with?
I think we're asked to hold both those. I think when we start practicing, what we're initially supposed to know is other beings suffer just like we do. And that's the beginning of suffering with. And bodhisattvas start to gain wisdom, and they know they can do something, like a swimmer coming by people who are panicked at water's edge, have never learned to swim in all their lives, and somebody knows they can be taught to swim. And that's a joy. And there you can give courage, you can give bravery, you can give a sense of, oh, this is possible. At Bodhisattva, I think, the brave Bodhisattva knows that. He's at that end for the suffering. So I think it's initially important that you have this equalizing sense. And suffering with sounds maybe too negative, like it's going to pull you down, but it doesn't. It's a recognition of your universal, of a universal fact of life, being suffer, not turning away from that, but being willing to wade into action because you know there's an end. Wisdom gives you an end.
It sounds like it's necessary to cultivate both method and wisdom at the same time, because otherwise your compassion would not be effective and your wisdom would be very self-centered. So, they kind of have to go together is what it sounds like. So, yeah. What you were saying earlier about the two wings.
You can't fly with one. That's the idea, I think. Yeah. Yes, I like the way you put it. Method and wisdom. Wisdom and compassion. See? Wisdom and compassion.
Okay, so I have a...
Can I just say, Naropa was Naropa University, Naropa the Siddha. He was brilliant, right? He knew everything there was to know about Buddhism. Smart as a whip. Lacked compassion. Kept wondering, what's wrong? Teacher kept wondering, what's wrong with you, Naropa? He lacked compassion. Have to have them both. Otherwise, you might as well go on and, what did this woman say? No, Shantideva says, otherwise you might as well go to bars and just hang out. But if you're on this path, you got to develop them both. Yeah. Naropa gets trained, and I hope to show you a PowerPoint. Talk about teachers in Naropa and Miller at some point. Jennifer.
So with this question of compassion, I'm hearing edges of it, but I'm not teasing to the center of it. It seems like there's a question of the self, and the self dissolving into a sense of the understanding of other people. And that in order to have compassion, there must be a dissolving of the self, not that it is annihilated, but rather that it is simply understood to be discerning of more than one. I don't know that I'm saying that quite the way it needs to be said to be understandable, but it just feels like there's a big question of self within compassion, that if you feel the suffering yourself, then you feel it better for others, but only if you can see yourself in others, perhaps.
That's put well. I don't know how to answer it better. I mean, yeah. You have to transform your attachment and your selfish clinging. If you haven't changed your mind in this way, none of the other practices will work. Doing them is just a joke. Even if you try to practice tantric meditation, you won't succeed unless you have changed within. Dharma means a complete change of attitude. And that is what really brings us inner happiness. Bodhicitta is not the culture of ego, not the culture of attachment, not the culture of samsara. It is an unbelievable transformation. I've always taught that the two chittas, one meaning heart and one meaning mind, a bodhisattva is defined as one who has both bodhicittas. Sometimes that's broken down into relative and ultimate. When we say relative, we're talking about compassion. When we say ultimate, we're talking about wisdom. Neither leads. One without the other is not enlightenment. Both are needed.